Fall is my favorite time of year, and I'm really excited about this quilt that I'm going to share with you today. It's called Hello Pumpkin. It's super quick and easy. We're going to make some simple pumpkin blocks and some tossed leaves, so let me show you how to make it. So let's dive right into today's project. Like I said, it's called Hello Pumpkin, and I just love it. It's so simple, and let me tell you all the things you're gonna need to make it. So first up, you're going to need one package of 10-inch squares, and I used Holiday Essentials Halloween by Stacy E. Hugh for Moda. This is such a fun collection, and you might remember I used this for my spooky season sew-along last year. I wanted them to coordinate, and it's great because you can get it all the time. You're also going to need 2 3/4 yards of background fabric. I'm just using this white. This also includes your sashing and your inner border, so that is all in there for you. Then you'll need 1 1/4 yard for your outer border and 5 yards for your backing using a vertical seam. And last but not least, you're going to need your favorite squaring tool. Mine is the Block Lock. Clearly Perfect would work as well. So let's dive in. So first up, we're gonna make our pumpkin block. And just to tell you, I divided my layer cake in half exactly. And even if there were duplicates, I made a pile of each, and I made 1 pumpkin with that print and 1 leaf with that print. And that's just how it worked out for this particular pack. It is gonna be great even if it's all scrappy. I just thought I'd give you a heads up on how I approached it. So for the pumpkin, I've got this 10-inch square, and we are going to measure over 7 inches and make a cut. So I just have this kind of lined up on my mat. And so this is going to be your waist from this. And what I did is I saved these pieces, and any of the darks I used to make the stems of my pumpkin. You're not going to need all of them, obviously, from your pack, but I just wanted it to have some contrast, so I just set this aside for later. And now we're gonna turn this, and we're just gonna trim a 1/2 inch off of one side. So this measures 7 by 9.5. Oops. Straighten that up again. There we go. Just like so, and that is the rectangle, which is gonna make all of our pumpkins. They're all the same size in this quilt. And so we are going to take some 2-inch background pieces, and we're gonna place those on all 4 corners of our rectangle. And we are gonna snowball these, which means we're just gonna sew from point to point all the way around, just like so. And it's just gonna kind of add some curve to this to make it look like a pumpkin. So let's take these over here. I'm just gonna stack these squares back up so that I don't lose them, and we'll do one after the other. When you are snowballing, you can draw that line corner to corner or press. I just like to use my diagonal seam tape. So I'm lining that up under the needle on one corner, and the corner closest to me is in line with that red line. And then we can just sew and keep that point in line without doing any marking, and it's good to go. So then now we'll just rotate and do all 4 of these. All right, our last one here, just lining it up with the corner of our rectangle and sewing point to point. Okay, we have all 4 of those complete, and so now we can trim off our excess and just leave our seam allowance. So I'm just gonna lay my ruler here and leave a 1/4 inch on each one of these. And one more. All right. So now let's bring the pressing mat over here, and we're just gonna press all 4 of the corners back. And when you use this method, your rectangle should stay the exact same size, which is what we're looking for. So now we can set this aside. So remember, I said you have this extra strip. What we're going to do is we're gonna trim this down to 2.5 inches, and then we're gonna sew a 1-inch strip onto one side. And so you can see I've already done this with one of the contrasting pieces that was left over. And now I'm just gonna press this back just like so. And then we can trim this into 1.5-inch segments and use this on a bunch of our pumpkins. So let's just line this up. And there's one. And you get quite a few, which is why I said you won't need all of these strips to make your stems, but you absolutely can use however many you want to get some variety. It's just a fun little detail. All right, so there's a few of those ready to go. And then we are gonna pair those up with some background rectangles that measure, let me just double check, 3 by 4.5. And so our little strip is gonna fit right between 2 of these rectangles. So let's sew one on either side. We'll take this to the machine. And you want the little white piece to be going up. It doesn't really matter at this point, but just keep that in mind for later. All right, once we have that first rectangle on, I'm just gonna kind of finger press this back and add the other one to the opposite side. And we can sew this down. Perfect. All right, now we'll give this a good press. Okay, and now it's as simple as sewing our stem to our pumpkin. So we are just going to make sure that little white piece is at the top and lay these right sides together, and then we're going to sew straight across here. Okay, so I always like to take a few stitches just to make sure it's all good to go, and then I line up my ends and sew straight down. You can stop and adjust if you need to. There we go, and our pumpkin block is done. Let's just give this one final press. All right, isn't that so cute? I just love it. Super quick and easy. So now we can set this aside and work on our leaf block. So this is the leaf block we'll be making today. It's super quick and easy, and it's one that we've made in the past, but the thing that I love about this is how we do it using the layer cake. And so I've made this little cutting guide to show you how you're gonna get all the pieces that you need, because we need a 6-inch square, 3 3.5-inch squares, and a 2-inch by 6-inch rectangle. So let's go ahead and get our 10-inch square here ready to go. I line it up on my mat, and then I measure over 6 inches and up 6. I gotta make sure I'm looking at my numbers correctly for this first cut. Just make sure everything is nice and straight, and I use the lines on my mat to just make sure that my ruler is straight. And so I'm gonna make one cut just right to this little edge, and then I'm gonna fold that back out of the way, and I can turn this to finish cutting my 6-inch square, excuse me. There we go. So we have our first cut ready to go. And then from over here, we're gonna get our 3.5. So again, just take time and make sure it stays lined up. And I am going to measure over 3.5, and I'm looking both directions here. 1, 2, 3.5, and 1, 2, 3.5. So there's the first one. And then while I'm on this side, I can go ahead and cut my 2 by 6-inch rectangle. And I just cut the full length of this to start at 2 inches. I'll set this aside. Now I can turn it and trim it at 6, just like so. And then from this little chunk here, I'm gonna get those last 2 3.5-inch rectangles. So let's see. Just gonna cut a 3.5-inch strip. And so just this little bit is our waist from our 10-inch square, so not much at all. And then we can turn this and cut 2 more. 1 and 2. Set that little piece aside. All right, so now we have all of our pieces. We move this out of the way to make sure you guys can see what we're doing. And to begin with, we're gonna pair our 6-inch print square that we cut with a 6-inch background square. You're gonna place those right sides together and we're gonna sew on all 4 sides. So let's take this to the machine. And we are just going to use our regular 1/4 inch seam and sew on all 4 sides. And the last side here. All right, all done. So now we can take our ruler again and we can cut this corner to corner. Once that way and once the other way. If you have a rotating mat, it's handy, especially if you have prepped a bunch of these and you're going to be cutting one after the other. It'll save you a bunch of time. And so now, if you're using the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer, you could square these to 3.5. Because I prefer the block lock, I'm going to go ahead and press these open, nesting my seam to the dark side. So I'll put the dark side up and roll these back, one after the other. There we go. Let me bring these over here and let's go ahead and square them. So if you're not familiar with the block lock, the logo side is usually going to go to your light side or your background side, whichever side the seam is not pressing towards. There's this little notch in here that is going to kind of lock against that seam that you sewed. So I'm just going to slide this down till this side matches up with our 3.5 inch measurement, and then we can just trim this side here, just like so. And I do like to go ahead and slide this down the other way and just trim off this little notch so I get rid of that bulk. And so I'm going to do that to these other 3 and I'll meet you back here. All right, so we have our half square triangles all squared up to 3.5 and ready to go. And so now for each block, you're going to have 2 3.5 inch background squares, and on one of those we'll be adding the stem. So we have our 2 by 6 inch rectangle that we cut out of our 10 inch square, and we are going to fold this in half long ways and press this. So let's take this over here to the iron, and we're just going to give it a good press in half. Just like so. And now what we want to do is we want to lay this corner to corner, and we are going to sew a 1/4 inch in from that edge. And so if you want to draw a line here to help you keep things lined up, you totally can. So I'm just going to lay my ruler point to point, just like so. And we're not sewing on that line, we're lining the raw edge of this up with that line and then sewing a 1/4 inch in. So let's go ahead and take this over here to the machine. You can put a pin in here if you need to. This started to shift on me, so I'm just going to realign everything. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring the iron over here just to make sure you can see what I do next, because this is a really fun technique. And so you can see there's our seam that we have drawn, and now we are going to press this over, just like so. And you can see how this works, and it's now covering the center of our block. And when I roll it over, you'll notice it's like right in the middle of my square. And so now that I've pressed this down, I'm going to top stitch. You could stitch just on the side that's loose. I like to stitch on both sides just because I think it looks nice. So I'm going to give this one more good press, and then we'll take this over to the machine and stitch it down. And so since we are top stitching, this is just a nice narrow seam right along the edge. You can lengthen your stitch length if you want. That looks really nice when you're top stitching. So there's that open side first, and then I'm going to flip this around and do the same thing on the other side. Okay, there we go. We have made our stem. Let's move this iron out of the way. And now we can trim up our block. We'll do that just by flipping this over. We haven't changed the size of the square. We've just added the stem to it. And so we can just trim this off on each corner. Just like so. Oops, I missed a little bit there. And we'll flip this around and do the same thing on the other side. There we go. Our stem segment is done, and so now we can lay out our block. And so this is really fun. I always start with the stem, and then our 3 solid print squares are going to come next. And they all touch the stem block. And then our half square triangles come in, and they go like so. And we finish it off with our last background square. And then we're just gonna sew these 3 across and 3 down, and your block looks like this when it's all finished. And that is it. That is what this quilt is made up of, this simple pumpkin and easy leaves. So now let's talk about how I put it all together into the quilt. All right, so here is our finished quilt. It measures 70 across by 80 down, and we have equal number of our pumpkin and our leaf blocks. And so you'll notice it's set together 6 across by 7 down, and I did sash in between each block and each row, as well as that first little inner border, and that's a 1.5 inch sashing. And then I finished it off with a 5 inch outer border and quilted it with the ghostly pattern. I also want to point out, I have a dark pumpkin next to a dark leaf, and I just didn't worry about it. I think it's really fun how it all comes together. And you'll notice that the leaves are just kind of tossed every which way to give it a lot of movement. So I hope you enjoyed this Hello Pumpkin quilt, and I'll see you next time. Hey everyone, it's Misty. Thanks for watching at home. If you aren't already a part of our Missouri Star family, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell if you want a notification every time we release a new video. I'll see you next Monday on the newest episode of At Home.